Hey guys, tonight, we begin not with kings or conquerors, but with the true ruler of humanity, a creature that never asked for the throne, yet somehow owns every couch, windowsill, and human heart it touches. It doesn't march, it doesn't roar, and it certainly doesn't obey. It simply exists, with judgment in its eyes and fur that somehow justifies every bad decision we make in its honor. Yes, I'm talking about the cat. Before you sink into the night, take a breath, dim the lights, and let the hum of the fan blend into the quiet. Now, let's begin. It all started with humanity's favorite bad habit, optimism. Around 10,000 years ago, someone in the Fertile Crescent looked at a handful of seeds and said, "What if I just planted these and stayed here forever?" And just like that, agriculture was born, along with taxes, property disputes, and the first HOA complaints. Farming brought food security, which was great, and rats, which were not. Grain stores became tiny rodent resorts, all-you-can-eat buffets with unlimited reproduction. At night, the sound of tiny chewing filled the air, a lullaby of regret for choosing civilization. Then came the African wildcat, Felis sylvestris libica, the desert's sleek, silent answer to pest control. It didn't come to help, it came to hunt. But the result was the same: fewer rats, fewer diseases, and one very confused species of early farmer wondering why this furry little sociopath kept hanging around. No one tamed the first cats. There was no grand domestication event, just an extended hostage negotiation. The cats stayed because the food was easy, and the humans tolerated them because the rats weren't. It was the world's first symbiotic relationship built entirely on mutual indifference. Every now and then, a brave farmer tried to pet one and learned a valuable lesson about boundaries. The cats didn't purr. They hissed, bit, and went right back to work. And yet, over generations, something strange happened. The least violent cats lived longer around humans, and the humans, against all logic, started liking them. Stockholm Syndrome, but with whiskers. Eventually, cats realized that glaring silently while providing minimal effort guaranteed free food, a lesson that still forms the backbone of every modern feline-human relationship. The rats kept coming, the cats kept killing, and humanity, for the first time in history, entered a stable, long-term partnership that didn't immediately end in fire. No contracts, no loyalty, just a quiet understanding. You handle the vermin, and we'll pretend you're cute. And for 10,000 years, that deal has held proof that evolution's favorite joke is letting humans think they in charge. No one remembers the exact moment humans and cats made their deal, mostly because neither side acknowledged it. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't mutual respect. It was more like, you keep the rats out of the grain, and we'll try not to throw shoes at you. This was the world's first nonverbal labor contract, and it's still legally binding in every household today. Cats didn't move in with humans. They allowed themselves to live nearby. They'd lurk around granaries, pick off a few mice, then stare directly into the souls of farmers, as if to say, "You're welcome." Farmers, bless their desperate hearts, mistook that cold indifference for cooperation. Unlike dogs, who begged, fetched, and built entire religions around human approval, cats treated the partnership like an unpaid internship, disappearing for days, returning with half a rat, and acting like they'd just negotiated world peace. Humans, ever the sentimental fools, began leaving scraps out for them, convinced they'd earned affection. It wasn't affection. It was rent. Over generations, the same quiet pattern repeated. The friendliest wildcats, meaning the ones who didn't. Immediately removed chunks of your forearm, lingered closer to human settlements. They tolerated us, occasionally let someone pet them, and managed to look disappointed the entire time. Humans, meanwhile, interpreted every flick of a tail as love. They started painting cats on pottery, carving them into charms, even calling them companions. It was history's first case of mass emotional projection. But make no mistake, cats were still wild. They hunted alone, mated loudly, and refused to listen to anyone. And yet they stayed because humans were sloppy, rats were plentiful, and the arrangement worked. So while the rest of the animal kingdom evolved through survival or cooperation, cats evolved through vibe management. They gave nothing, demanded everything, and got it anyway. Thus, the silent contract was born. A 10,000-year agreement between two species who would never fully trust each other, but also couldn't stand being apart. Humans thought they had tamed nature. Cats thought they'd found indoor plumbing. Technically, both were right. Domestication wasn't dramatic. It was slow, awkward. A process that started with a hungry cat and an overly optimistic farmer. Nobody tamed anything. They just tolerated each other until evolution got bored and made it official. Among the wild cats prowling the edges of early villages, some were a little less stabby. A few didn't bolt at the sight of humans, and one or two even allowed a tentative pat without summoning chaos. Those survived. Being friendlier meant food, warmth, and the occasional idiot willing to share leftovers. Cats didn't evolve because humans trained them. They evolved because they figured us out. They noticed that if you make big eyes, tilt your head, and pretend to care, humans will feed you. The same strategy influencers use today. This wasn't domestication. It was psychological warfare, fought quietly over generations, with purring as the main weapon. Humans thought they were in control. They started saying "our cats," as though ownership could be declared over a creature that routinely ignores commands, personal space, and property rights. Ancient pottery shows humans cuddling cats, and you can almost see the confusion on both faces. To the humans, it was love. To the cat, it was a brief hostage situation with snacks. Natural selection favored cats who could fake affection. The hissers and biters were outnumbered by their slightly more patient cousins, and from that small genetic shift, Felis Catus was born, the domesticated cat. Though domesticated is a generous word, modern house cats still share 95% of their wild genome, which is science's polite way of saying they readjust, pretending they don't hunt because they have to. They hunt because they're bored. They don't cuddle for warmth. They cuddle because it makes you drop your guard. So no, cats didn't change to fit human society. Humanity just adapted to living with a beautiful little sociopath that purrs while plotting your downfall. Evolution calls it symbiosis. We call it cute. By around 2000 BCE, humanity had fully fallen for the scam. What began as pest control had evolved into mass emotional dependence. The Egyptians, brilliant architects, mathematicians, and chronic overachievers, looked at cats and said, yes, this tiny apex predator is clearly divine. Egypt wasn't just the birthplace of pyramids and pharaohs. It was the birthplace of something far stranger, the world's first cat cult, and it was magnificent. The African wildcat, once a scrappy little rodent assassin prowling the desert, had now upgraded to palace life. Gold, jewelry, gourmet meals, servants on standby, the full influencer package. Killing one, even by accident, was punishable by death. Imagine explaining to your family that Uncle Horam got executed because he stepped on Bastit's favorite furball. At the center of this obsession was Bastet, the feline-headed goddess of home, fertility, and music, basically the ancient world's version of a Pinterest mom with divine powers. Her temples overflowed with cats that priests fed, brushed, and probably apologized to daily. Egyptian art was full of them, sleek, graceful creatures sitting beneath chairs, pawing at fish, or judging humanity in hieroglyphic silence. They were protectors of families, destroyers of serpents, and serial offenders when it came to knocking over expensive things. Archaeologists have even uncovered vast cat cemeteries, thousands of mummified felines wrapped in linen and buried with offerings. One site alone held over 300,000 cat mummies. That's not religion, that's a national obsession. And the best part, the cats didn't have to do anything. They just stared into the sun, occasionally pretended to listen, and somehow earned divine status. Because, to the Egyptians, the cat was everything no other animal could be: independent, elegant, untouchable. Dogs were loyal, cows were useful, but cats did whatever they wanted and still got worshipped. It was the ultimate power move, and humans respected it. By the time the pyramids touched the sky and pharaohs were mummifying their pets, one thing was certain: cats had already won. If you needed proof that Egypt had gone fully cat-brained, you didn't have to look far, you just had to look up. Everywhere, jewelry, temple walls, household altars, there she was, Bastet, once a lion-headed war goddess, fierce and bloodthirsty. She eventually mellowed into a gentle domestic cat, still divine, just cuddlier. Basically, even the gods went soft for cats. Her cult exploded. Temples in Bubastis became sanctuaries of sunlight and serenity, filled with cats lounging on altars, purring like holy engines. Pilgrims traveled for days to bring offerings, gold trinkets, baskets of fish, and yes, sometimes entire mummified cats, because, apparently, nothing said devotion like gift-trapping your pet for eternity. Killing a cat, even by accident, was a death sentence. There's even a record of a Roman soldier who made that mistake. The mob got to him before the pharaoh did. The empire that conquered the world couldn't survive a domestic feline incident. To Egyptians, cats weren't pets, they were protectors, guardians of the home, slayers of serpents, and statistically more effective than most priests. Families kept them near cradles for protection, and some believed a cat's purr could heal, a theory modern science still hasn't disproved, mostly because no one wants to argue with a cat. Bastet's popularity turned Egypt into the first cat utopia. Her temples became feline spas, endless food, sunbeams, and worshippers too polite to disturb nap time. Through Bastet, cats transcended their mortal roots. They weren't just animals anymore. They were divine intermediaries. Proof that the fastest route to immortality is being slightly mystical and extremely photogenic. It was the perfect scam. Egypt gave them temples. Cats gave them indifference. And somehow both sides thought they were blessed. But if you think worship was the peak of devotion, you underestimate humanity's ability to go overboard. Welcome to the age of cat mummification, a booming spiritual industry of embalming, wrapping, and mass feline flattery. Archaeologists have found entire necropolises, cities of the dead, filled with millions of tiny mummified cats, each wrapped neatly and buried with more ceremony than most humans ever got. Why? Because cats were sacred to Bastet, and giving one a proper burial brought good fortune in the afterlife. It's the same logic people use today when rebooting the Wi-Fi router, desperate faith in mysterious forces. But demand grew, and where there's demand, there's capitalism. Priests began breeding cats specifically for sacrifice. Bastets, temples turned into the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime for divine blessings. Order one cat mummy, receive spiritual protection in 2 to 3 business days. And just like today's online market, there were scams. Some mummies were fakes, stuffed with straw, feathers, or, in one case, an eel. Yes, ancient Egypt had counterfeit cat relics. Capitalism truly is eternal. Still, the devotion was real. Cats roamed temples freely, stole offerings, and probably knocked jewelry off altars just to test gravity. They were living gods with zero self-awareness. Egyptians didn't mind. They called it mystery. So yes, the land of pharaohs and pyramids spent centuries embalming animals that couldn't care less. It wasn't just religion, it was mass delusion with excellent lighting. And through it all, the cats blinked slowly, because, in their minds, immortality had already been achieved. By now, cats weren't animals, they were brands, influencers with divine endorsement deals. Egypt had turned an apex predator into a luxury symbol, and business was booming. Bastet was trending. Temples had 5-star reviews, and being seen with a cat said, "I'm spiritually enlightened, but also fashionable." Pharaohs leaned hard into it. Cats appeared on jewelry, pottery, and tomb walls, a silent message carved in gold. If you wanted eternal life, it helped to have a cat staring disinterestedly at you while you died. Artists painted them sleek, perfect, unbothered, the world's first PR campaign for divine poise. No one ever painted the cat screaming at 3 a.m. or dragging a half-dead lizard through the door. That wasn't the aesthetic. The myth was curated. Cats as elegance, balance, perfection. In reality, they were chaos in fur coats. But Egypt saw that contradiction and called it mystery. Every noble household had cats, not for pest control anymore, but for prestige. A cat wandering into a banquet was a celebrity cameo. Guests would bow. Servants would pour milk. The cat would ignore everyone because it had better things to do, like staring at the ceiling for no reason. The elite even began breeding cats for aesthetics, sleeker coats, darker stripes, more regal stares. Egypt didn't just invent royalty, it invented looking royal while doing nothing. Cats had gone full divine influencer. No effort, no loyalty, no interest, just effortless perfection. The more detached they seemed, the more people adored them. Ancient Egypt didn't just worship cats, it invented celebrity culture. And while humans built statues and temples in their honor, the cats simply blinked once, slowly, because Egypt's greatest civilization had become their marketing department. But the story doesn't end in Egypt. As temples gleamed and worshippers prayed, cats were already plotting their next empire, quietly, accidentally, and globally. Ships in the ancient world were floating buffets for rats, grain, ropes, food, paradise for vermin. So sailors brought cats aboard for pest control. The cats, of course, did what cats do best, showed up, killed a few mice, took a nap in the sun, and occasionally knocked something expensive into the sea. And just like that, the cat diaspora began. From the Nile to the Aegean, cats spread through trade like furry little diplomats of chaos. Every port wanted one, because Egypt had them, and Egypt was cool. Unlike most animals, cats didn't need training. They didn't need taming. They just stepped off the ship, saw the local rats, and started freelancing. They didn't spread because humans wanted companionship. They spread because the universe itself can't resist a creature that demands everything and gives nothing. And honestly, can you blame it? It all started because humans had crumbs. As centuries rolled by, cats became the silent backbone of civilization, guarding grain stores, following armies, and sleeping through most of recorded history. They crossed deserts, seas, and empires, leaving paw prints in temples, tombs, and occasionally on freshly written laws. Wherever they went, they left the same impression: efficient, mysterious, and just a little bit condescending. Civilizations rose, empires burned, philosophers argued about the soul, and through it all, cats just watched, unimpressed. While humans conquered the world for glory, cats did it by accident, and with better posture. The Greeks meet the cat. When cats finally wandered into ancient Greece, they met a culture obsessed with beauty, order, and geometry. Three things cats respect in theory, but destroy in practice. Before cats, the Greeks relied on weasels for pest control. Actual weasels, tiny screaming goblins that lived in your house and occasionally bit you. So when sailors brought sleek Egyptian cats, elegant, quiet, and sandal theft free, Greece fell instantly in love. Cats fit the Greek aesthetic perfectly. They were poised, mysterious, and completely indifferent, basically how most philosophers described the gods. Even Aristotle might have admired an animal that could ignore him so thoroughly. Soon, cats became status symbols. They weren't working pets like dogs, more like living sculptures that occasionally blinked. They lounged in courtyards, soaked up sunlight, and radiated existential superiority. Artists painted them. Poets adored them. Women saw them as kindred spirits, graceful, inscrutable, and perpetually unimpressed. The cats, they didn't care. They just hunted, napped, and knocked important scrolls off tables. Every culture learned the same thing. A cat will fix your rat problem, but replace it with an ego problem. Meanwhile, the weasels were furious. Unemployed overnight, probably waving tiny protest signs. Egyptian imports are ruining local business. No one listened. Cats had better PR and better fur. By the Hellenistic period, cats were philosophers in fur coats. They didn't obey commands, but they didn't need to. Simply existing beautifully was enough. Rome, where law meets chaos. When the Romans adopted cats, they didn't just get pets, they got tiny anarchists. Rome was obsessed with discipline, hierarchy, and Latin grammar, and cats violated all three by simply existing. They did nothing, followed no rules, and still got free food. At first, Romans brought them for practical reasons, to protect grain from rats. They called them mures, bellators, mouse warriors, which sounds noble, but mostly meant naps, professionally, until something squeaks. Before cats, Romans used ferrets and weasels, great workers, terrible vibes. Cats, however, looked elegant while committing murder. Soon they appeared in mosaics, frescoes, even tombs. Archaeologists have found cat skeletons carefully buried, proving even Rome's toughest soldiers melted at a purr. But cats didn't care about legions or emperors. Imagine Julius Caesar himself. conqueror of Gaul, trying to summon a cat, only to get slow blinked. That's real power. Cats fit into Roman society precisely because they didn't fit at all. Independence, dignity, controlled arrogance. Rome worshipped that. A senator could give a speech about discipline and then go home to a creature that ignored him completely. Philosophically humbling, spiritually infuriating. By the time the empire peaked, cats were everywhere, from soggy Britain to sunburnt Egypt. When Rome fell, cats didn't mourn. They just stepped over the ruins, found the next granary, and went back to work. Rome built empires. Cats built legacies, one paw print at a time. Meanwhile, in Asia, while Egyptian cats were busy reclining on silk pillows, a completely different cat-human alliance was forming in ancient China and Southeast Asia, not out of religion or romance, but pure agricultural desperation. Enter the Asian leopard, cat Prionolaris bengalensis, smaller, wilder, and with eyes that could judge you in 4K. Unlike the pampered Egyptian tabbies, these cats weren't worshipped. They were tolerated, like weird roommates who kill pests but never pay rent. Farmers noticed when these spotted assassins showed up. The rats vanished, so they left out food. The cats took the food, killed some rodents, and never said thank you. This wasn't domestication. It was mutual convenience with emotional distance. Over time, some leopard cats mellowed out. Farmers even tried breeding them, a decision historians now categorize as bold but regrettable. Still, they never became cuddly. These were the ancestors of every modern cat that lets you pet it once and then disappears for 2 days. The two cat civilizations for a few thousand years. 2 cat civilizations thrived. African wildcats, sleek, self-assured, Mediterranean aristocrats. Asian leopard cats, moody freelancers who lived in rice fields and tolerated no nonsense. 2 continents, 2 cultures, 1 shared belief: humans are idiots. Then global trade happened, and surprise, Africa's cats went full colonizer. They were friendlier, prettier, and slightly less murdery. Within centuries, they'd replaced their Asian cousins almost everywhere. Scientists call it introgression. The cats probably called it Tuesday. Eventually, their descendants met under wagons, near barns, sharing a rat, and merged. The modern domestic cat was born, part African confidence, part Asian distrust. That's why today's cats are affectionate 1 minute and plotting your demise the next. They're not moody, they're bicultural. The dark ages of catkind by the Middle Ages. Cats had perfected their strategy: stay quiet, look cute, let humans do all the work. It was flawless until Europe, in its infinite medieval wisdom, decided anything quiet and independent must be evil. Suddenly, cats, especially black ones, went from holy protectors to demonic spies. Their crimes: moving too gracefully, staring too long, not barking on command. In short, being cats. The church launched an anti-cat campaign. Monks called their eyes windows to hell. Priests warned witches turned into cats at night. And peasants, who already feared thunder, mirrors, and literacy, panicked. Thousands of cats were killed across Europe, burned, drowned, thrown from towers, a continent-wide purge of pest control. The cats, understandably, dipped. They went feral, hid in barns and forests, and probably thought, good luck, idiots. Without cats, rats exploded in number. Grain rotted, fleas thrived, and soon the continent became one giant biology experiment. Then came the Black Death, a plague spread by rat fleas. The very evil cats were accused of serving had actually been keeping the real evil in check. The irony was cosmic. Humans had fired their best employees and immediately got a performance review from nature. By 1350, 1/3 of Europe was dead. If there'd been a medieval Yelp, the continent would have scored 0 stars. Would not recommend, should have kept the cats. The final lesson after centuries of being worshipped, hated, and blamed for everything. Cats learned one truth. Humans are unstable, but easy to manipulate, so they stayed. Not out of loyalty, not out of love, but because it was convenient. And that, more than anything, is why cats won evolution. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. The church had spent a century calling cats the devil's minions. Now the devil had arrived. Microscopic, plague-ridden, delivered straight to Europe by the rats the cats used to eat. Eventually, people started connecting the dots, probably between coughs. Towns that still had cats, less dead. Towns that didn't. Let's just say the property market opened up fast. Maybe, just maybe, the so-called agents of Satan weren't the problem after all. Slowly, like furry karma on 4 legs, cats crept back into villages. No grand entrance, no told you so, just silent, surgical vengeance. They hunted the rats, broke the plague's supply chain, and restored balance without so much as a thank you meow. Did humanity apologize? Of course not. Humanity never apologizes. Instead, everyone acted like this was part of the plan. The church stopped sermonizing about feline witchcraft. Peasants started leaving milk out again, and the plague, offended by the sudden outbreak of common sense, packed up and left for Asia. By the 15th century, cats were back on top. Not because they begged forgiveness, but because they outlasted everyone else. While Europe buried half its population, cats just yawned, stretched, and went back to work. They became the only species in history to win a holy war by doing absolutely nothing. When the smoke of the Middle Ages cleared, cats didn't march triumphantly through the streets. That would have required enthusiasm. They just appeared. One morning they were on rooftops again, blinking at the sunrise, pretending they'd been there the whole time. Europe, embarrassed, quietly dropped the whole servant of Satan narrative and handed them their old jobs back. Farmers built shelters for them. Nobles flaunted them as luxury accessories. Monasteries kept them in libraries to guard against mice and accidental enlightenment. The cats accepted all this with their usual emotional neutrality. No forgiveness, no grudge, just a light shed of fur on every holy manuscript. To them, the plague had merely proven a point. Never fire your best employee during a crisis. Then came the Renaissance, the great human reboot. Painters, scholars, and queens rediscovered the cat's aesthetic genius. Da Vinci sketched them mid-pounce, clearly fascinated by a creature that could break the laws of physics and etiquette in one move. Cats were back in fashion, but not because they'd changed, because humans finally remembered how much worse life was without them. Yet even at the height of their comeback, cats refused to play nice. They ignored training, obeyed no commands, and dispensed affection like it was a limited edition product. Humans called this mystery. Biologists call it behavioral dominance. From Egyptian temples to European castles, the story had come full circle. The cat's social rank rose, fell, and rose again, completely unaffected by reason, religion, or rat. Every era thought it was using the cat. Every era was wrong. By the dawn of modernity, the cat had outlived pharaohs, popes, and pandemic sand, still wouldn't come when called, because humans never domesticated cats. Cats domesticated civilization. It started with a man who wasn't even supposed to find anything. James W. Marshall wasn't a prospector, a dreamer, or a gambler. He was a carpenter, just a guy trying to build a sawmill for someone else's business along the American River in January of 1848. The plan was simple cut, would make money, go home. But destiny, as usual, had a dark sense of humor. One cold morning, while inspecting a water channel, Marshall noticed something glimmering in the mud. Not a coin, not a reflection, something raw. He picked it up, squinted at it, bit it, because that's apparently how you test everything in the 1800s, and realized he might be holding gold. The problem was, nobody believed him. He ran to show his boss, a man named John Sutter, who immediately realized this discovery could either make him rich or destroy everything he'd built. Spoiler, it was both. They tried to keep it secret. They failed spectacularly, because gossip, like gold, travels fast, and within weeks, word spread across California like wildfire, whispered by greed. At first, people laughed it off. Gold in California. That was like saying you'd found diamonds in your backyard outhouse. But when a few flakes turned into ounces, and ounces turned into bars, disbelief melted into mania. The newspapers got hold of it, and America collectively lost its mind. Remember, this was a country that was still figuring out what it was. The East Coast was crowded, jobs were scarce, and the idea that a man could just pick up a shovel, head west, and strike it rich was intoxicating. Overnight, a phrase was born, gold fever. And unlike most fevers, this one didn't kill quickly, just made everyone insane. By 1849, the invasion had begun. They came by ship, by wagon, by foot, tens of thousands of people from everywhere. Farmers abandoned fields, clerks left their desks, even soldiers deserted posts. Some sold everything they owned for a chance at glittering salvation. They called themselves 49ers, not because they liked numbers, but because that was the year the madness peaked. Imagine San Francisco, sleepy port town of maybe 1,000 people, turning overnight into a booming, chaotic human anthill. Ships clogged the harbor, streets filled with tents, and prices skyrocketed faster than a TikTok trend. A single egg could cost a fortune. A shovel, the most boring object on earth, became worth its weight in gold. Literally, entrepreneurs saw opportunity. Some mined gold, others mined the miners. Levi Strauss sold durable pants that would become jeans. Samuel Brannan, the man who first shouted gold to the world, became California's first millionaire by selling picks and pans, not digging. Humanity, it turns out, will always find a way to profit off someone else's hope. Out in the hills, things were different. The dreamers who made it to the goldfields faced a reality far grimmer than the headlines. The rivers were cold, the land was unforgiving, and the odds of success were microscopic. For every man who found gold, 100 others found mud, frostbite, and disappointment. The work was brutal, digging, panning, hauling sunup to sundown. There were no banks, no police, and certainly no HR department. Just dirt, desperation, and a lot of very tired men with shovels. Tensions ran high, tempers ran higher. Camps erupted into brawls over a few ounces of shiny metal. Some made fortunes overnight. Others lost everything, including their sanity. But the illusion of possibility kept them there, because the gold rush wasn't really about gold, it was about the idea that maybe, just maybe, you could change your life with your own two hands. Of course, not everyone chasing the dream was American. The promise of instant wealth crossed oceans. Ships arrived from Chile, Peru, Australia, and most famously, China. Thousands of Chinese laborers came to California, drawn by the same rumor of riches. They called it Gold Mountain. What they found was less mountain, more uphill battle. Racism was rampant. Laws were written to keep them out of the best claims, and yet they endured. They worked the abandoned mines others gave up on, extracted what was left, and built communities that would outlast the rush itself. Their story is often buried beneath the glitter of American myth, but their contribution is carved deep into California's soil. And then there were the indigenous peoples, the ones who were there first. For them, gold didn't mean wealth, it meant disaster. The influx of settlers brought disease, violence, and displacement. Entire villages were wiped out, not by war, but by greed disguised as destiny. Rivers were poisoned with mercury and silt from mining operations. Forests were stripped, ecosystems shattered. The gold rush didn't just reshape California, broke it first. It's one of history's most ironic tragedies. The search for fortune left behind a landscape of ruin. Still, for every broken dream, there was a legend born. Stories spread of men finding fortunes the size of kingdoms. Some struck gold in minutes. Others spent years chasing a single flake. There was a man named Old Dry Diggings who found a nugget so big it made newspapers lose their composure. There were bandits, con artists, gamblers, and self-declared claim inspectors who inspected nothing but your wallet. The West became a lawless laboratory for human ambition where fortunes rose and fell faster than you could say Eureka. And speaking of Eureka, that word, meaning I found it, became the state's motto, a permanent reminder of a time when hope and madness shared the same face. But perhaps the wildest part wasn't what people found, it was what they built. The chaos of the rush birthed infrastructure, cities, and a new economy. San Francisco exploded into a metropolis almost overnight. Roads were carved through wilderness, ports expanded, and communication networks began to stretch westward. The gold rush turned California from an obscure frontier into the beating heart of American expansion. It connected the continent, fueled migration, and paved the way for the transcontinental railroad. The irony. The majority of people who went searching for gold didn't find any, but their presence, their failure, built something more valuable, a state, an identity, and a myth that still glitters today. Still, success stories did exist, and they kept the fever alive. There were men like Samuel Clemens Lader, known as Mark Twain, who arrived during the tail end of the rush. He didn't find gold, but he found stories, turning failure into fame. Others stumbled into accidental fortunes, selling supplies, food, or entertainment to the restless miners. Brothels, bars, and saloons multiplied faster than gold claims. A man could lose his fortune in a single poker hand or a single bad whiskey decision. It wasn't the American dream, it was the American experiment, running at full speed with no brakes. Meanwhile, the government tried to catch up. The sudden population boom forced Washington to pay attention to the far-flung territory. California went from wilderness to statehood in record time, just 2 years after the discovery. It was democracy with a pickaxe, built on chaos and caffeine. But the rush also accelerated darker institutions. Vigilante justice became the norm. Lynch mobs replaced courts, and the idea of manifest destiny, that divine excuse for expansion, its grip on the American psyche. Gold didn't just build California. It fueled the mythology that America was destined to take everything it touched. Back at Sutter's Mill, where it all began, John Sutter watched his empire collapse under the weight of his accidental discovery. The flood of settlers overran his land, stole his livestock, destroyed his crops, and left him penniless. The man who triggered the world's greatest treasure hunt ended his life broke and forgotten. If that's not poetic irony, nothing is. And James Marshall, the man who first spotted that glint in the river, he too died poor, bitter, and largely ignored. The gold rush gave them fame, but not fortuna, fitting metaphor for the thousands who followed. By 1855, the easy gold was gone. The rivers had been picked clean, the hills scarred by dynamite and desperation. The dream shifted from individual fortune to industrial extraction. Mining companies moved in, bringing machines, chemicals, and hired labor. What had begun as a romantic adventure turned into corporate colonization. But by then, the gold rush had already done its work. It had rewired the American brain, convinced an entire generation that luck was a strategy and risk was a religion. Looking back, the gold rush wasn't just an event. It was a mirror. It reflected humanity's endless appetite for more, the hunger for wealth, the hope for reinvention, the belief that somewhere out there something glittered just for you. Most who chased that dream ended up with empty pans and broken backs. But they also ended up with stories that would echo across generations, shaping the identity of a nation built on ambition and audacity. Because, in the end, the gold rush was never really about gold. It was about belief. The kind of belief that makes you leave everything behind, walk into the unknown, and convince yourself that the next river bend might just be your salvation. And maybe that's why it still fascinates us. Not because of what they found, but because of what they were looking for. Hope, adventure, purpose. Gold fades. Legends don't. By the mid-1850s, the California gold rush had gone from a fever dream to a full-blown empire of dust and dynamite. The rivers that once glittered with flakes were now thick with mud, and the men who once whispered eureka were starting to cough it instead. The amateurs had left or gone mad, and what replaced them was colder, louder, and infinitely more efficient machines, corporations, and investors who didn't pan in rivers. They tore the rivers apart. The era of the prospector was ending. The era of industrial mining was beginning. And with it came a new kind of madness, not of hope, but of control. Hydraulic mining changed everything. Instead of men bending over streams with pans, companies built massive cannons that blasted hillsides with high-pressure jets of water, washing entire mountains into sluices to capture microscopic gold dust. It was spectacular and horrifying, a combination of human genius and total disregard for nature. Whole valleys disappeared, forests eroded, rivers turned into sludge. One witness said the Sierra Nevada looked like a battlefield where the enemy was the earth itself. They weren't wrong. For every ounce of gold extracted, tons of soil and poison flooded downstream, burying farms and towns in mud. But nobody cared, because money flowed faster than the water that carried it. The people who stayed behind weren't the dreamers anymore. They were the workers, the unlucky, the desperate, the immigrants who couldn't afford to leave, Chinese laborers, Mexican miners, and even freed African Americans. toiled in brutal conditions for companies that paid them in scraps. The independent prospector had vanished, replaced by an early form of industrial capitalism that didn't care if you struck gold, only that you showed up on time. It was the first glimpse of what California would later become, a place where dreams are mass-produced, sold wholesale, and monetized by someone else. But for all the chaos and cruelty, something extraordinary was happening too. Out of the mud, a new society was forming. San Francisco had exploded into a city of nearly 50,000 people. What started as a lawless shantytown now had theaters, banks, and newspapers. Ships that had once brought fortune seekers now lay abandoned in the bay, repurposed into saloons and hotels. The city didn't just rise, it erupted. The gold rush had dragged civilization westward, kicking and screaming, and now it refused to go back. California wasn't a frontier anymore. It was the future. Yet, beneath that glimmering promise, the cracks were already showing. Wealth concentrated at the top, while the rest scraped by. The same land that produced fortunes also produced famine for those it displaced. Indigenous tribes were pushed further out, their numbers decimated by disease, violence, and starvation. Between 1848 and 1870, California's native population collapsed by more than 80%, a genocide that history often wraps in the shiny paper of progress. For every gold nugget found, a piece of humanity was lost. Still, the myth kept growing. The gold rush wasn't just an event, it was a brand. The newspapers sold stories of success, because failure doesn't inspire migration. Pamphlets promised that every man could be rich if he just worked hard enough, a marketing slogan that would echo through centuries of American capitalism. Never mind that by 1852, the easy gold was gone. Never mind that most of the miners were broke. The dream was too profitable to kill. And people, it turns out, will travel thousands of miles, not for truth, but for the illusion of it. Even as gold fever cooled, the infrastructure it built kept the machine turning. Merchants, railroads, and banks took the baton from the miners. The gold rush had forged California's DNA, a mix of ambition, greed, and impossible optimism. You can trace that lineage straight through to Silicon Valley. Different tools, same psychology. Back then, men dug in rivers. Today, they dig in algorithms. The goal hasn't changed: find something shiny before everyone else does. But for the 1850s Californians, the shine was dimming fast. By 1855, many camps had turned ghostly. Tools lay abandoned, cabins empty, and the few who remained lived in denial, convinced that one more swing of the pickaxe might change everything. The gold was still there, deep in the earth, but now it required machines, capital, and chemistry. The age of the lone prospector had ended, and with it, the last illusion of equality. The rich mined the poor as effectively as they mined the land. Hydraulic mining companies bought political power, bribed officials, and even rewrote laws. They turned rivers into private factories. Farmers downstream fought back, their fields buried under mining debris. Legal battles erupted, culminating in 1884 with one of the first environmental rulings in American history, the Sawyer decision, which banned hydraulic mining. It was too late for most of California's valleys, but it marked a strange turning point. For the first time, someone had looked at gold and said, maybe it's not worth it. But by then, the gold rush had already gone global. News of California's wealth had sparked similar frenzies in Australia, South Africa, and Canada. California had exported not just gold, but gold fever itself, contagious idea that reshaped the 19th century. Prospectors became an international species, migrating from rush to rush like nomadic gamblers chasing luck across continents. The world had learned a dangerous lesson. Wealth wasn't built, it was found. And if you couldn't find it, someone else would sell it to you. Back in California, the social alchemy of the gold rush was still simmering. Immigrants from every corner of the globe had converged there, creating a cultural explosion unlike anything America had seen. Streets echoed with dozens of languages. You could walk from an Irish pub to a Chinese temple to a Chilean dance hall in the span of an hour. It was chaos, but beautiful chaos. From it, California developed its defining trait, reinvention. Nobody cared who you were before you arrived. What mattered was who you could convince people you were now. In a sense, the gold rush invented the performance of identity. Everyone was pretending rich, poor, drunk, desperate, but for a moment, they all believed in the same illusion. And amid that illusion, innovation thrived. Engineers developed new mining tools, entrepreneurs founded companies, and artists captured the madness in sketches and songs. Painters like Charles Nell turned muddy camps into mythic scenes of heroism. Writers romanticized the struggle. Even photography found its footing. Their daguerreotype studios popped up to immortalize men who might never live long enough to tell their own stories. The gold rush was America's first media spectacle. Every shovel full of dirt had an audience. Of course, for many, the show ended in tragedy. Disease swept through camps, fights turned deadly. Suicide, alcoholism, and despair were common. When your entire identity depends on luck, failure becomes a kind of death. And yet, even in ruin, they clung to hope, because that's the real secret of the gold rush. It wasn't fueled by greed. It was fueled by belief. Belief that tomorrow could be different, that you were one lucky break away from rewriting your story. The women who came west, though few at first, transformed the landscape even more. Many opened boarding houses, ran businesses, or when options ran out, became the silent backbone of towns built on male chaos. They brought stability, schools, and eventually families. The rush had started as a man's world, but it couldn't survive as one. Civilization, it turned out, required more than picks and pans. It required permanence. And while the miners dug for gold, California itself was quietly digging for something far bigger, identity. It was no longer just a state, it was an idea. The gold rush gave it a mythology that never died. Every new generation of Californians inherited the same fever, just with different tools. Hollywood would sell dreams instead of nuggets. Silicon Valley would mine data instead of dirt. And every startup pitch, every screenplay, every influencer chasing virality, those are just digital echoes of the same old promise. Somewhere out there, there's gold, and it's yours if you're fast enough. But back in the 1850s, none of that existed yet. There was only mud, sweat, and the slow realization that the dream was slipping away. As the last independent miners packed up their gear, some drifted into other trades, railroad work, ranching, or farming. Others stayed, unable to leave the ghost of what might have been. They'd sit by the river at dusk, staring at the water, remembering the day it glittered like salvation. The gold rush had taken everything from them and given them nothing except stories. And in the end, maybe that was the real treasure. Because when you strip away the gold, what's left is humanity in its rawest form, hope. greed, resilience, and delusion, all rolled into one. The gold rush wasn't a chapter in history. It was a mirror that showed the world what people become when they believe that luck is destiny. Some found fortune, most found themselves, and California, that accidental empire of dust and sunlight, never stopped chasing that glimmer. It still hasn't. By the late 19th century, California had traded its pickaxes for progress. The rivers no longer shimmered with gold, but the people still did, with ambition, with invention, with the stubborn refusal to stop digging for something better. The gold rush had ended, but its ghost had moved into the walls of every saloon, every railroad, every bank ledger. The land had been scarred beyond recognition, but from those scars grew something extraordinary, a state addicted to possibility. The miners who once chased fortune became the architects of cities. Their descendants built railroads, vineyards, and universities. San Francisco rose from the mud to become the pulsing heart of the Pacific, a city that learned to rebuild itself every time it burned down. Gold had brought the crowd, but survival had built the civilization. And the fever that once drove men to dig through rivers now drove them to invent, to film, to dream. You can still feel it's the gold rush rhythm beating under California's surface. It's in the tech startups, chasing algorithms like modern veins of ore. It's in the film studios, panning for box office miracles. It's in every artist, entrepreneur, and wanderer who comes west believing that luck might still be hiding just beneath the dust. The gold isn't metal anymore, it's ideas, it's fame, it's virality. The dream never died, it just upgraded. But the story isn't all glitter. The same ambition that built California also broke it in places. The land still carries the toxins of mining. The rivers still remember. And the native tribes who once thrived on those rivers still fight to be remembered too. Every ounce of progress came with a price. Yet, if history teaches anything, it's that humanity will always gamble with the future when the present feels too small. The gold rush was proof that hope is both our greatest strength and our most dangerous addiction. And maybe that's why it still fascinates us. Because the story of gold isn't about metal, it's about meaning. It's about people who looked at a wilderness and saw a promise, who believed that a handful of glitter could rewrite their fate. And even when it didn't, even when it left them broke and broken, they passed that hunger down to the next generation. California became the monument to that hunger, the place where you go to chase something shiny, even if it kills you trying. In the end, the gold rush wasn't a moment. It was a mirror. It showed humanity's best and worst, side by side, the courage to risk everything, and the blindness to see what that risk costs. The rivers have gone quiet now, the picks rusted, the fever cooled. But if you listen closely, under the hum of cities and the glow of screens, you can still hear the echo of 1,000 dreamers whispering one word that changed the world: Eureka.